Right.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is now 1:33 and call the order of the Orange County Sewer District Number 1 Advisory Board for the Orange County Legislative. Please note this meeting is being transmitted live via audio stream. The public can link to this video stream by visiting the Orange County website, www.orangecountygov.com, clicking on the tab for the legislature and locating the meeting on the calendar. Please silence your phones, tablets, and other electronic devices. Please be mindful that the microphones here in the statutory committee room are sensitive and robust. And at this time, would you please rise? Pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. Carrie, could you do roll call?
Benelli, present. Amo. Cheney.
Here.
Kotel. Eller.
Here.
Tui.
Here.
One absent.
Okay, first up on the agenda, we have 1A, timeline progress update, longevity and expansion. And I'd like to call up the usual cast here. We got Joe Mahoney, Senior Assistant County Attorney, Bob Gray, Deputy Commissioner EF&S, Anthony Griffin, Principal Sanitary Engineer, Department of Public Works, EF&S, Mary Beth Gianconi, Partner, Delaware Engineering, Brock Giusolo, Project Engineer, Delaware Engineering, and is Tracy going to be joining us?
She's not. I'm going to cover her topics.
Okay, great. All right. Mary Beth, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be back, and we have a bunch of things to go over today. So I know we have an agenda, kind of, because we've provided the technical staff with an updated facility plan, we'd like to kind of walk through those pieces, which eventually get to schedule. So we kind of want to walk through some of the new information that we would have at the last meeting for you. So big picture, we have an evaluation of the treatment plant capacity upgrades as a phased project. So upgrading as a phased project. We have also a brief description. We've said for many months that building a reverse osmosis system here would be very costly. We now have some cost estimates that we can talk about kind of in the grand scheme of things. So that when we say very costly, you can appreciate what we are talking about. We then want to talk a little bit about the collection system that delivers wastewater to the wastewater treatment plant and the improvements that we need to be done to that system to match up with the capacity improvements that you're thinking about at the wastewater treatment plant. So the first thing I think we should do is discuss this was the Tracy part of this, the flow estimates that we got from the various communities. As people will remember, we updated this document. I don't know, I just kind of randomly, I didn't necessarily split those equally. So we updated this. There should be more. Peter should have more. Does everybody have one?
I also like the record to show that Supervisor Tony Cardone is with us and Monroe Village Trustee John Carl is joining.
Excellent. So we're going to start with this discussion because this is really the reason why we're here present talking about increasing the treatment capacity, as well as the ability to convey the wastewater to the wastewater treatment plant. You may remember when we were here at the last meeting with Tracy, she ran through the analysis that she had done and the data that she had received from the various contributors. Since that meeting, we have had some updates. Those updates are reflected in these numbers on this sheet. And in summary, what you can see is that we go from our current capacity is about 6 million gallons a day, 6 million gallons a day. We're close to that capacity. In years 0 to 5, it's projected that we would need to add about 2.7 million gallons a day. And then what you see at the bottom here, when you look at units and then cumulative gallons, the cumulative gallons for each time frame take into account the prior time frame. So 5 to 10 would be an increase of about 5.3 million gallons. 10 to 15 would be about 7.8 million gallons. And when you're out 15 to 20 years, it would be 11 million gallons. This is in addition to the 6 million gallons that we have now. So that's what this is representing. You'll see there's still some spots in here where we say no information. That's okay. A lot of this was for commercial and industrial, which we know the characteristics of our sewer service area are primarily residential. So to accommodate areas where we didn't receive, where the planning boards or perhaps the town didn't have projects on the books or wasn't aware of projects coming down the pike, we did use the traditional estimates that are used in these cases, which are based on census data. And we do a population extraction. We convert that population into sewer units and then the sewer units into gallons. So essentially what this is telling us is that over a 20-year planning life, we need to be looking at having a wastewater treatment plant that has a capacity somewhere in the range of 16 to 17 million gallons, provided that, because this is a little bit of crystal ball, that this growth pattern that's predicted by the communities will occur.
And this went up about a third from what we originally had our calculations at.
Correct. And the big difference here, we did, and thank you to Supervisor Cardone, we did pick up a few projects in town of Monroe that we had some information on in the initial calculation, but we didn't have the full story, so we did add those. Most significantly, and the biggest change to this is the input of information from the town of Blooming Grove and the village of South Blooming Grove. And that's really where the primary change from the prior version of this spreadsheet to the current version, that's where the primary change occurred. So it's important to understand that this is the backdrop from which we're doing this planning for this project, for what are the reasonable demands from a treatment perspective, but also where in the district will these demands be contributed so that we can evaluate that infrastructure that actually conveys the wastewater to the wastewater treatment plant. So from here, Brock's going to take over the presentation and walk through, we're not going to get into super technical details on all of the many, I think there's like 9 or 10 different technical approaches to improving the wastewater treatment plant. We had a 3 or 4 hour meeting this morning with technical staff to go over those things, but it'll talk a little bit about what the recommended alternative is, what the different scales of phasing are likely to be, and also a little bit about costs in terms of the capital costs that are predicted, as well as the electrical costs, which are an important contributor as we think about the operating costs of these facilities.
Okay, so I've got more detail when we get into the collection system side, but we've been, I'm just gonna go right to it. I apologize, I didn't bring handouts. We've all seen the site.
I was gonna say, does everybody want more wallpaper, or are you?
I'm just gonna go right to the last one.
The last.
So we've talked many times about the different treatment plant options, technologies that we have, how those tie into what you need to do today versus what you're doing in 5 years, what you're doing in ultimate build out, what the site can ultimately accommodate somewhere down the road with that technology and full build out. And through all of that, we looked at the IFAS, we looked at all of these different technologies. What we've ultimately come up with is the recommended treatment technology, taking into account the ability to phase it, the operation costs, the stuff that the operating staff there is used to working with now. Well, we're recommending that we go to an SBR technology. And the reason that we're recommending that is it allows us to build the plant out in phases in a way that if we go to the phase one approach would be, if you recall, you've got, this is your existing train one. This is your existing train two, and this is your existing train three. What the SBR approach allows us to do is to under the phase one project, we would demolish your train one process, which is the process built in 1977 in the late 70s, and build 7 million gallons of capacity using the SBR technology in that footprint. So that would be, we would take train two offline. That would give us a phase one capacity of 7, plus keeping train 3 in service at 2. That would give us the 9 MGD capacity that the project started with, is how to bring the plant to 9 MGD. What that does allow us to do from there, though, is we still have this space available. If we do that, we can build another 7 MGD of SBR capacity where your current train 2 is, which brings us to 7, 14, an additional 2 MGD still operating train 3, bringing us to that 16 MGD, which kind of ties back into that growth projection that we're seeing. And then as we go way down the road, we have the ability to take the area where train 3 is now, way out in the future, and build approximately another 5 MGD of capacity in that location, which would bring us, now we remove the 2 that's there. So bringing us to about 19 MGD, full build-up capacity on the site. This is being aggressive with the site, really using every ounce of real estate that's available. And so from that, and the thing that we haven't discussed yet is what these things would cost. This 9 MGD build-out under your phase one, your capital cost for the treatment plant facility is about $125 million. So this expanding, so now you'd have a 9 MGD plant, go from 6 to 9, about $125 million. The next phase.
How much?
What 125?
120.
The next phase to go from 9 to 16 in today's dollars would add about another $85 million project. That would bring you out to that 16 MGD. So that would take you from 6 where you are today to 16.
Those are 2025.
Sorry, those are 2025.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second.
So and then this third phase way out, we're more just that we didn't price, we're more, what is that? Do we have the ability somewhere down the road to do more on the site than it does now?
The cost wasn't clear, we're going for the phase 2, the total cost would then be
That would be,
$25. $25 for the 2 weeks.
phase
So
2,
if you did phase 1 and phase 2 together,
Correct.
that's the
that would be
question.
about $200 million.
About 200 million.
Okay.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about these numbers. As everyone knows, prices and escalation of prices and inflation have been a little hard to predict in recent times. Brock priced this based initially on 2022 dollars, because those are costs that we know. We bid jobs all over the place. We're getting bids in constantly. We talked to all the equipment suppliers, all the people who would be relevant to this, and they gave us pricing, and that's a number that we can really stand behind really firmly. However, that said, and this gets to schedule, if we were to start design on this today, we would likely be looking at bidding this project and having a shovel in the ground in 2025. So to accommodate that time schedule, Brock came to me and said, I've done 2022 numbers, and what do we want to do for escalation out to 2025 bid? So I went home and I spent an entire night looking at commodity prices for the last 10 years, looking at Bureau of Labor statistics, looking at construction pricing, looking at all kinds of things. And the conclusion that I came to, and I am not an economist, but the conclusion that I came to, and I did read a lot of articles about this, there is not a there is no longer the standard relationship, say, between the production of steel and the cost per piece of rebar. It has really fluctuated wildly. So looking at that, looking at the escalation in prices we've seen, we saw a big bump in 2018. We saw another one in 2020. We saw one in 2021. 2022 has, I almost don't want to say it, kind of reflected 2021 to a degree in this case. But you all are consumers of news. You know, you see what's going on with inflation on the consumer side of the fence. What we decided to do, and this can be changed by anyone else's, numbers, however you want to do this. We did 7% annual inflation on our 2022 numbers. So we added 7% to get to 2023. We added 7% to the 2023 number to get to 2024. We added 7% to the 2024 number to get to 2025. So these values that we're talking about, this 125 million, 85 million, those reflect that 7% per year annual escalation in costs.
And to give a kind of a concept of what inflationary pressures do, our that $125 million number, that 2022 number is 100 million. That's what 7% over 3 years does. You go from 100 to 125. So, we're hoping that we get this inflationary thing slows, but it's significant, and the price of construction has gone up significantly in the last 3 years. So then the next thing.
Let's talk briefly about
So on the RO side, we've talked, I think last time I was here, I've been showing like a conceptual site plan, minimum site of 5 acres. We need to pump up to the site, run it through, basically building a water plant in front of the RO plant, so it's multiple membrane systems. Hauling, we would have 5.7 million gallons of brine storage we have to put on the site in order to accommodate those peak flows. Average day, you would be hauling 300,000 gallons of brine from wherever we sited that thing to a treatment plant in New Jersey. So the capital cost to construct that is in 2025 dollars, $116 million. The operating costs, annual operating costs to operate that, when you take into account hauling all that brine, is $25 million a year. So
and that doesn't account for the electricity to run.
The electricity is about $250,000
a year.
So it is when we say it's a significant capital cost and a significant O&M cost, that's the kind of dollars that we're talking about. $116 million in capital, plus another 25 million to operate. With the lion's share of that 25 million being trucking your brine down to a facility in New Jersey that would then ultimately.
Yeah, what are those tractor trailers, the tanker trucks, what do they hold about?
6,000 something like that.
Yeah, the big ones are 9, the little ones are 6. Yeah. So it's a line of trucks.
It's a line of trucks.
Right, so as you recall, the reason we evaluate this, right, is because obviously we have a species permit that tells us we need to meet this water quality standard. We've applied for a variance because, as we've said all along, it's not economically feasible. But it also really works against, if we look at the state, at their mandates regarding the environment and energy conservation and a whole series of other things, complying with this water quality standard is really counter to so many of the state's other interests. A line of diesel-powered trucks from here to New Jersey every day, 365, does not make sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So in the variance application, we will be including this information in addition to the energy consumption, the raw materials, all of the things that go along with that, again, to bolster that argument that from 2 points of view. One is the economic impact of this is undue. And second is that any environmental benefit you may receive from reducing the amount of TDS and chlorides in the round code may be overcome by the environmental detriments from truck traffic, increased energy consumption, and all of these other things. It's a balance that has to be considered. But we've said for a long time, it's really expensive. We wanted to explain to you how expensive really expensive is.
Just a question, maybe I lost in the middle of something, but if we were not to have, if we were to get the variance on the speed, we wouldn't get the duals.
Correct.
What would the cost of that, same you're talking about, I missed some step in there.
Oh, so the RO cost is a standalone cost. So with the
Standalone.
variance, that entire standalone cost
Goes away.
So the cost that we just talked about, the cost of the treatment plant upgrade,
125
125, that does not include an RO. That presumes that we deal with TDS in a different way.
Right.
okay, and if it doesn't, then the other costs come in.
Correct.
Correct.
So essentially, the cost of the RO is the same as the cost of, and from a capital perspective, it's almost identical to the cost of expanding the plant. Because RO systems are just really, really costly. As Brock said, you can't just take the water from the plant and send it to the RO system. You actually have to clean the water up even more before you send it to the RO system. And we're not talking about treating all of the water. We're talking about treating some portion of the water so that we can use the plant water as dilution, so that at the end of the pipe, you comply with that water.
And it still remains a 6 million gallon a day.
And this is for the 9 million gallon a day upgrade.
But I mean, with the RO.
The RO ends up, we would send about 11 million gallons up there under peak day flow. We would send about 11 million gallons a day up to that process. So what that process looks like is we would have microfiltration, which is because your treatment plant's just gonna have sand filtration. And so you need to be continually taking those smaller and smaller particles until you get to the RO out. So the RO would follow way too quickly if we didn't have a secondary filter stage. So we have a microfiltration stage in there, which essentially is a drinking water plant. That stage, so it's membranes, there's a lot of backwash, everything that goes on. That backwash would have to be sent back to the plant. Then we would go to the RO process. The RO process, about 75% of the water that's going into the membranes actually passes through the membranes. The rest of it stays on the, I guess we'll call it the dirty side of the membrane. So you're taking your TDS concentration, multiplying it by 4, because you're taking all the TDS stays on one side of the membrane, whereas the water goes through. That 25% of that water gets put into storage on site, and that's what gets trucked off site.
I may not have this all right. Steve, you tell me, you interpret it how. Is it, we've all heard Kirsto is approaching, I guess, the state and grant money to do a reverse osmosis process on the chicken. I have in front of me a request for funding that they use for this. And if they were successful in taking the chloride and TDS out of the chicken, pay for it themselves, and whatever, how would that affect what we're trying to do here if they were successful?
That's a great question. So,
Jeez, I didn't know.
no, it's a good
That's a
question.
great question.
It's a really good question. So this kind of gets to something else we were going to talk about today, so we'll just talk about it now, which is the variance application. And folks may remember the variance application.
Okay.
So folks may remember that when we applied for the variance, state has a set of regulations that you follow when you ask for a variance. There's a series of criteria, and you don't have to meet all of the criteria, but you have to meet a number of the criteria to substantively show, because the purpose of a variance is to say that compliance with the water quality standard is not possible for some reason, right? So the variance that exists today out in the world broadly is the Mercury variance. So New York State has a policy that says that wastewater treatment plants should reduce the amount of mercury that's entering the environment. Mercury is ubiquitous, it's really everywhere. Part of this is our industrial past, part of it is just out there, right? So, however, meeting that very, very stringent criteria for the vast majority, if not all wastewater treatment plants, maybe save industrial plants that can really tightly control what's going in, is impossible. So the state issued a blanket variance for all wastewater treatment plants for mercury. So what they said was, we know you can't meet the water quality standard, which I think is 0.7 or 0.07. It's very, very low. They said, we think based on data that we collected from everybody, they went out and got a lot of data, and everybody monitored their mercury. We think you can meet 50 reasonably. by going to dentists and saying, okay, mercury amalgam, us old people who have fillings, right? Let's control that. Let's not put that in the sewer system. Let's make sure that that gets separated, those kinds of things. So it's a minimization plan to try to get people as close to the water quality standard as possible. We applied for a variance under the exact same regulations for total dissolved solid and chloride, and we're following that same path, right? So again, in order to, just like the state had to go out and say, well, what's a reasonable level? That 50 is reasonable. They made every treatment plant in the state take data and figure out, do analytical sampling and say, well, what's my mercury? Because these wastewater treatment plants aren't designed to take mercury out, right? You have to go get it at the source. Just like TDS and chloride, go get it at the source. Wastewater treatment plants aren't designed to take it out. You'd have to build an RO system, right? So part of our variance application, you remember we've talked a lot about this thing called a QAP, a Quality Assurance Project Plan, is to go do this sampling, right? And if you remember what we're sampling, just like how the state at all the wastewater treatment plants sample how much mercury is in the water, part of the objective of our sampling is to evaluate the sources of total dissolved solids and chloride. So we're going to evaluate a number of different things. We're going to evaluate the groundwater, which is the primary drinking water source here. So we're going to go to the water suppliers. We're going to evaluate, we're going to take samples and find out how much TDS and chloride is in your water. We're also going to evaluate surface waters to say what's running in from, say, the salting of roads and, those kinds of other activities. To get to your question, how much difference will it make? We will, to some degree, know when we do this sampling, because we're going to do cradle to grave. We're going to say the water comes out of the ground over here and goes into this water distribution system, goes to people's homes, where the things that we do every day in our lives add total dissolved solids and chlorides to the baseline water, and eventually gets to the wastewater treatment plant. We know our plant doesn't do anything to reduce it, so when the water coming in will be exactly the same as the water going out, and then we're going to look at what's the water in the ramp. So we will now have kind of those discrete contributors of total dissolved solids and chloride. So we should be able to better understand that. But I will say that based on the data that we have so far and where we started with the variance application, while the chicken brining plant is certainly a contributor, it is not the only source of total dissolved solid and chlorides. The geology here, everybody knows, people have hard water, that's total dissolved solids, and one component of that's chloride.
But I also think that plant doesn't discharge to the air in the plant, right?
No, the KJ, that plant
Okay.
discharges to the KJ.
Discharges to the
Then goes
KJ.
to a state wetland. And
Yes,
there are a number of wells in that location that may be getting affected by. the
so we will
discharge of-
capture it in this data.
Right, we don't know exactly what's happening. That's not involved.
So the pathway would be groundwater back up into wells, if that
We
is.
presume that is happening.
Right,
And
so-
if they reduce it with cradle to grade, at the grade end, we see a significant enough difference to help us with our speeds. That's the question.
It's hard to say. I do think that one of the things that could help substantially is changing the source of drinking water. So as we know, KJ has been working for a number of years on tapping the aquifer, right? So the aquifer, New York City's watershed, the aqueduct, I'm sorry, I said aquifer, but the aqueduct has very low TDS and chloride. So if from the starting point, it has very low TDS and chloride and minimal stuff that gets added in people's homes, so that could potentially make a big difference all at once.
We should have let them do it 20 years ago.
So anyway, so that's a good question though. And so on the, just to finish that, since we got into that, on the sampling, we sent the quality assurance plan, project plan to DEC. They made some comments. The comments were more about ensuring that the plan document itself, it is very understandable to anybody who picks it up and understands what was the purpose of this sampling. Their comments didn't change the number of samples that we were taking, didn't change the locations or what we were sampling for, or the methodologies that were being used to do so. So where we go from here, we have a final plan, environmental health, and I always forget you guys' name, facilities and something or other. They have that plan in hand right now. It's been signed and executed by Tracy, who will be sort of the manager, the quality assurance manager. It's been signed by Brock as the overall professional engineer for the project. The county will be signing it because it's the project, part of your variance. Once we have that done, it will go back to DEC, they will acknowledge receipt of it. And then Tracy and Anthony have come up with a plan to execute sampling. That will involve, in kind of broad strokes, Tracy coordinating with the water suppliers that we have been in touch with to set up the actual sampling dates. Tracy coordinating with the laboratory to get all the materials and the sample bottles that are required. We are looking at 4 samples, 83 locations. It's like 360 samples. So it's a lot of samples. She will then be working with Anthony and the staff that are specifically going to go actually acquire the samples to do some training, and then she'll go with them as they initiate sampling to make sure that it's being done in accordance with the protocol. All of that process can be initiated in approximately 2 weeks. So we'd like to, in an ideal world, be sampling in the 2nd or 3rd week of August.
May I ask a question,
Sure.
Chairman?
Yes.
Do we have to wait for the DEC to approve the paperwork you're
We
sending
do not,
before you can go out and say?
we do not at this point.
Then
We're-
you were ready to go tomorrow.
Yep. So as soon as we can get that signed, we just need the signed document, get to DEC, they will acknowledge that they've received it, then we're good to go. They are queued up and ready to go when they receive it. So that kind of answers that question, which we were gonna follow up on later on anyway. Now I think the next thing on our list is to talk a little bit about the collection system. So for this, we do have pretty color maps. So folks may be familiar, right? We have this wastewater treatment plant. It collects wastewater from a lot of different places. Some of them are in the Orange County Sewer District, some of them are outside of the Orange County Sewer District. One of the things that we were tasked to do was do something called a hydraulic analysis of that, portion of that network of pipes. So we say those words, but what does that really mean? So what you're looking at, the first picture, the orangish area is the actual sewer district. The yellow locations are locations that are served by the sewer district but are outside users. Luna communities, satellite communities, whatever you want to call them. We were tasked to look at something called Interceptor sewers within the Orange County Sewer District number 1. An Interceptor sewer is a big sewer that gets its water from other networks of smaller sewers. So this is sort of the arteries, right? And then the rest of this is the capillaries and all of the little pieces and parts. At the end of the day, all of the water that has to get to the wastewater treatment plant in one way or another goes through one of these sewers. There's a few little exceptions to that. The bulk of the water goes through these sewers. So they become important for us to evaluate in terms of their capacity. People may recall that the North Interceptor and the 2 interceptors that go off of that are in the village of Curious Shoal were upgraded. And that had to do with their ability to carry water. We've done essentially the same analysis for the remaining sections of the interceptor system that's within Orange County Sewer District number 1. They have names, they're discrete segments. Behind all of this is a computer model with reams and reams and reams of pages of math, where we figured out how much water can be conveyed through a pipe of a certain size at a certain slope with a certain material, because the pipe material matters because there's friction as the water travels through the pipe. These are all gravity sewers. So we have to, Mother Nature said, God said water goes downhill. That's what this all relies on. So we've conducted a pretty robust analysis of these intercepted sewers. Back to our little sheet that we started with, which was our flow projections. This is where this becomes really important. As you can see on that first map, there's a whole bunch of arrows that say, like the one on the top says Village of South Blooming Grove and Chester with part of the town of Chester flows. The arrow points to where those flows enter the Orange County system. When we modeled this, we said, okay, what's today's condition? How much water gets to these different points? How big a pipe do you need to convey that water safely to the wastewater treatment plant? Then when we looked at these projections, we said, well, if at this point we increase the amount of water coming to any one of these categories, what does it do in terms of the size of the pipe you need downstream? to get that water to the wastewater treatment plant. Does that make sense, everybody? So there's a couple of terms that we need to kind of go over. So for these pipes, these are gravity sewers. So on a regular day, there's pipe, there's water in the bottom, and there's airspace. The water's flowing along the bottom of the pipe. When we have a big rain event, the pipe will fill up to its total amount. There's no airspace left, right? That's okay. It can do that. As we all know, there's manholes along the way. Those manholes are where the water's coming in, right, from different locations. Those manholes can also fill up to a different event. There's a point at which we get to a condition called surcharge. Do you want to explain surcharge a little bit?
So when you're designing a brand new system, brand new collection system, gravity system, you always design such that you never reach a surcharge condition, meaning that the pipe never gets above the water level never gets above the top of the pipe. And there's a few reasons for that, but you do not want, once you start allowing surcharges into your manholes, the system in a lot of ways starts to work as a pressure system. You're using the head that rises up in the manholes to drive the water through. So it changes the capacity. That doesn't mean that it doesn't work when you're running in those surcharge conditions, because it does. It's just not what would be a current design standard to do that. And that ability to surcharge gives you a buffering capacity such that you can ensure that you don't have overflow.
So then, so overflow is the next stage, which is where that water in the manhole, there's so much water in the pipe that can't travel through the pipe that the water in the manhole actually overtops and ends up out in the environment. So that's an overflow. So we certainly have to design to avoid overflows. And ideally, we design to avoid surcharges for many conditions. The next term that we should talk about quickly is peak hourly flows. So you know how we always talk about the Harriman treatment plant, we say it's a 6 MGD plant, right? That's kind of what we call it. We say it's a 6 MGD plant today. That's what's in the permit. When you go look at the permit, it says, maximum monthly daily flow, MMDF, is 6.0 MGD. The reality is that when it rains a lot, 20 million gallons of water gets delivered to that plant. That's the peak hourly flow. So we don't take into consideration 6 MGD out here in pipes. We have to take into consideration when it rains like crazy and all of that water ends up in the pipes. We still have to be able to accommodate getting all of that water to the wastewater treatment plant. So the collection system ends up getting designed to accommodate that peak hourly flow. The lesson there is controlling I&I makes a big difference. If you can reduce your peak hourly flow, it's a multiplier, right? So if we're multiplying by 2, we're multiplying by 3, we're multiplying the average day by 4, we can reduce that. We can reduce the size of the pipe that's required. But right now, we have to, in consideration of this planning exercise, we have to consider what are we getting today, which is about 20 million gallons, and what would we get in the future if we add these and we make the assumption that the amount of rainwater that gets in the pipes today is the same amount of rainwater that get in the pipes out here in the future when this happens, right? When we get additional growth. So, yeah.
When we have this, when you're saying that this correlates and as you go to the other sizes where it
Yep. shows
shows that it's increased. So this is now another pool of money. This is nothing to do with the increase down there. We're
Let's keep talking about that because it's really all together. That's where we're going with this.
yeah, but I think the North Interceptor cost $7 million.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the costs of upgrading the collection system here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know what, I just had one question, I'm gonna accept the question.
The ground leak interceptor, is that incorrect there? Shouldn't that be 15 to 18 inches, not 15 to 10 inches?
So this is the existing condition, believe it or not, it actually goes from 15 out in the hinterlands to 10. So it gets smaller, which is why that's an existing problem today. So this map that you're looking at, this first one is the existing condition. This is the pipe size we have today. That is obviously not logical. Little to big makes a lot of sense, but big to small doesn't. And so that's what causes these hydraulic restrictions.
I thought that was replaced.
So could that be reasons why Bob, you think that could be the reason why we had the problem over at that interceptor? Because we're going from 15 to 10?
What happens is the 10-inch actually has a higher carrying capacity than the 15. The 15-inch line is laid flat. That was done by the Moon Up Commission years ago to accommodate town line road that's outside the district. That line was put in very flat and it tied into the existing round lake interceptor, which ended with it at a 10-inch line. So there's a huge drop between the 15 and the 10-inch line, but that 10-inch line is very steep. It's not a good idea for a 15-inch to go into a 10-inch line, because what happens is accumulation of material in a 15-inch line then ends up going into a 10-inch line, causing clouds.
So that is the cause of that.
It does, to some degree it does.
So actually, if we go to the next map, this will kind of leads into this discussion, right? So the next map at the bottom, it says figure 2, and it says existing 6 MGD HSTP, which is Harriman Sewer Treatment Plant. So we color coded this we did sort of the stoplight process. Green means the water is conveyed from those areas and there's no surcharge condition. Yellow means there's surcharging under some conditions. So you see that line that you were just talking about, where it's that 10-inch, that needs to be increased to avoid that circumstance we're talking about right now, right? That surcharge. And it actually says on here, it says increased to 18 inches. So now it would be substantially larger, right? So it would convey more flow. And that's, again, this is without adding new customers. That's just to address the concern that was just brought up, right? Another area that you see that's yellow is the area that's going up towards Blooming Grove. That also needs to be increased because that also is under today's conditions. And again, remember, this is those peak hydraulic flows when we get all that rain. On a daily basis, it's all good. But when we get all that rain, those areas are surcharging. So that's another problem area, and I know for the district, it's another point of issues today, right? The red is the lower interceptor. So pretty much almost all, if not like almost all of the water that goes to Harriman goes through that. Everything gets direct to that one pipe. That pipe was built when the original plant was built here. It was built for, we have documents that are a little unclear, but it was either built for 4 MGD or 6 MGD. It served you well. It's been in the ground since 1977, 78. And it conveys that 20 million gallons that we're talking about. Even though it was only designed for maybe 4 or 6 with a lower factor for the rain, it's done a good job. But it also, at this point, is the red shows us that it's surcharged and it has the potential to have those manholes start filling up. And that's a condition that we want to avoid. So that's under current conditions. So the way we built this model was we said we had to figure out what does this system do today. And then as we think about increasing the wastewater treatment plant size, we also at the same time, it doesn't do us a lot of good to increase the wastewater treatment plant size if we don't also think about how are we going to get the wastewater there. So every sheet of paper you have after this one is showing you different areas of the system that would need improvement to accommodate different volumes of water. Again, based on these predictions, because we had to figure out, yes, you guys from 6 to 9, right? That's okay, no worries. There's 13, and what you see is they track with this, right? So that's how we did this modeling. Was we said the communities tell us this is going to be the flow increases. So this is the implications to the collection system. And what you see as you flip through them, flipbook style, as you add more flow, more areas of this large collection system have to be improved to convey. We talked about making Harriman bigger all the time, but if the water doesn't get there, it doesn't help us, right? So this is new information to you. We recognize that. Essentially, big picture takeaways, right? Current system has served you extremely well. It is being stressed by 2 factors. One is there is a lot more flow coming into the system than was originally anticipated way back in the 70s. Second thing is those peak hydraulic flows, that rain factor. Since the last time we looked at it, it's gone up quite a bit. We looked at it in 2016, 2017, and through 2019. We just updated it. And that amount of rainfall that's getting into the pipes has gone up quite a bit. So removing infiltration and inflow, that excess, that rainwater that doesn't belong in there in the first place, is one of the keys to trying to kind of contain the need to make these improvements, at least at the scale that we're talking about. Because at the end, if we go all the way to the end of this, and you go to the one that says 16, there's a lot of red on this map. And the other thing, so there's a lot of red on the map, and the other thing to know is that if you look at the little labels down on that thing we call the lower interceptor, so from about where that green vertical line is in the center of the map, heading down towards the Harriman Wastewater Treatment Plant, you see that that's a 54-inch pipe and a 60-inch pipe. That is a really, this is a technical term, really big pipe. A really, really, really big pipe. So let's talk a little bit about costs.
So from that, so she gets the fun stuff, and I gotta talk about costs. That's
Legislator Raymond.
I heard, I don't know, maybe Bob or some of the other getting answer. That north interceptor pipe has been improved by Kirstow's development, or Kirstow.
Right.
Remember the negotiation, the legal negotiation we had between Kirstow and
Yeah, we had some discussion.
okay, that's what Lennon was presenting. Does that imply that the same model will work for if Monroe's has to be included, that section has to go, would be a Monroe cost, and that would be a Blooming Grove cost?
Well, so in terms of who, so I think for.
That seems to be the policy you struck on the north interceptor, is it gonna be all the same if there's whoever's using it pays for it?
If I
Or is
can,
the county pay for it?
what if I can, what we'd love to do, because we're just the technical people. We'd love to get through the technical presentation and tell you what those costs are, and then I think, you know, we're, who pays for it, it's above our pay grade. So we'd love to use your time today so that we could get through the technical presentation, and then I assume there's gonna be a lot of conversations, but for right now, we just wanna get the technical cost part out here, and then you guys can do your process for how you discuss that. Does that work?
Of course.
I know there's gonna be a lot of questions about that, but I think we gotta tell you what the costs are, and
No, I just wanna make sure I understood on the record that is already been taken care of.
the one thing we should say is that the analysis work that was done to do the North Interceptor, and then, you know, it has the two branches, right?
Yeah.
We have that report. They used a program called Sewer CAD. We use a program called Sewer Gems. Yeah, they're clever, right? They essentially do the same thing. The analysis, when we started that very, very first model that you have, how we, in part, how we ground truth that model was by taking the North Interceptor pre-upgrade and modeling it and comparing where it surcharged and overflowed to the North Interceptor post-upgrade, because we had the benefit of having that information, and show that it solved the problem.
Okay.
So the investments that were made were very wise, and they were extremely forward-thinking investments in that infrastructure.
Okay.
So essentially, we applied the same methodology from a technical perspective, not a cost perspective, but from a technical perspective, to do this evaluation of what all of these different implications of adding more flow to the system would be. I know, I always give him the bad job.
I'm used to it. What can I say?
Good cut there.
So before we talk about that, I misspoke on the cost estimate for the SBR. I said it was at $2025. We were at $125 million. That was today's dollars on the SBR side. I'm sorry. I was bad. Gladstone looked at the wrong line.
We have some tables in here that we're gonna send you all this stuff.
But the RO is 2025.
Yeah, the RO
is
is 2025.
This is, I glanced down and looked at that, and so I apologize. So I know that it's us being right down 125 in 2025 dollars. It's today's dollars.
It's actually, so
$2025 would be $155 for the phase one, and then $95 for the phase two.
right, and we're gonna send to everyone, so when we get to the end of this, we're gonna send, so we've given this technical report to technical staff. We're gonna be sending everyone, we did not prepare an executive summary for this yet. We're gonna be doing that for you, for August, and in addition to that, this only addresses, in our world, we called it book one back, all back in the day, increasing the Harriman wastewater treatment plant and the collection system to go along with it. We will also have for you the next go around, those ideas of what if we went off-site? So a treatment plant that wouldn't discharge to the Ramco, be it perhaps discharging to the Moodna or the Wallkill or some other water body or the Hudson River. So that will be included in the next version of this, and there will be an executive summary that will make this stuff, and we'll have all the numbers listed out for you, so it'll be much easier. I also have a memo that kind of goes over these in very broad strokes that we'll leave you guys with the schedule in it. But for right now, we'll get you all those numbers. But I think conceptually, all of these costs are well over $100 million. And when you add them up, when you add up the cost of collecting system and wastewater treatment plant, which we're going to get to now, you're over $200 million. So conceptually, that's those are the ranges we're in, whether it's 205 or 208, or to some degree, that's a little academic. But let's talk a little bit about the collection system.
So the important thing that we take out of the collection system, and I think the decisions that ultimately have to be made on the collection system, and so from the treatment plant, we've talked about, we can build phase one, get to a 9 MGD plant. It doesn't, that the plant's designed always to go to the next phase and go to the next phase. So from, so you can build a 9 MGD and then come back and build phase two to get you to 16 and things like that. On the collection system side, pipe that you guys got in the ground now, it's 50 years old. We put a pipe in the ground, and ideally, we're not back digging that pipe up. There's no way to phase it. So the decision as to what full buildup capacity you want that system to be is a decision that's pretty important that be made soon. So from that, if you look at the two maps that we have, we basically focused on a 9 MGD and a 16 MGD treatment plant capacity, actually, and then we've talked about a full buildup capacity of 19 MGD. So if we look at, what we're fundamentally looking at is that whether we build a collection system that brings us to that 9 MGD buildup, and that is going to be the figure, what's shown as figure 3 here, that shows Orange County Sewer District number 1 for 9 MGD, and that one increases like the lower interceptor increases from 36 and 30, that goes to a 48-inch pipe. And then it goes out from there. But that option, taking us out, I'm gonna make sure I have the right number, taking us out to
Yes, the problem is that those labels never got changed, but that is.
So that brings us out to it's a $62 million project, everything that would need to be done in that collection system to bring that up to the 9.
So that's 9 MGD.
So
it's 155 plus 60.
Plus 60.
Bring us to 9.
But I want to emphasize the point, so look at this red line, look at where this goes, right? This lower interceptor, you're only going to do this project once. This is not with the wastewater treatment plant, you can say, I want to do 9, and then 5 years from now, I want to add to go to the 16, and I can totally do that. This, you're not going to come back 5 years from now and say, oh, now I think this should be 20. This is a one-time project because the cost of ripping all this out and this is very disruptive to the community. You're disrupting roads and lives, and it's so the decision to be made is to say, do you want to build this interceptor capacity for the biggest thing you think you might reasonably ever see? Because if you build this to just accommodate 9, you may be short-sighted. You may need to do more.
So the next really option that's really the decision would be to build the collection system for that full build up to 19 to 16 and beyond. And actually fundamentally, it's interesting, the full build up to 19 and the 16 MGD option, the collection system really doesn't change. It's almost negligible, the changes to it. So we would, but that one, if you look at figure 5, So that goes, instead of 54-inch pipe, we've got a lot of 60-inch pipe in there, so the pipe's, this big around, this big pipe. That one would bring us out to, and if we expanded the system, so the system was designed for that full build out to 19 MGD, where you can get the treatment plant to 19 MGD without doing anything else on your main transmission lines in your collection system, that would bring us to about a $75 million project. So you'd be going from a $62 million project to a $75 million project to increase that collection system capacity to basically match what we view the ultimate build-out capacity of the Harriman site is. So that would allow you to go to the phase 2 and ultimately phase 3 of the treatment plant
Without putting
doing
back up
anything
the
else
collection
in
system
What about the 13? What?
That ties back to this, but since our next phase,
Okay.
we're kind of glossing over it just because our next phase, we go from where the plant design laid out, we went from 9 to 16. So it tied into this more so than it ties into what we're doing with the plant. So we were running those evaluations, we wanted to see what that looked like.
So the last number was the 16 million gallons.
Correct, or beyond. That actually would bring us to full build-outs on the capacity on the site at 19.
And that was how
That
much?
about 75 million.
75 and in 2022.
2025, I'm sorry. Well, I am backwards.
Well, it's because the way these tables are laid out, we're gonna change this. They're very hard to read.
2025, 75 million.
So we're looking at 200 million between the 125 and the 75 million for full build.
No.
No,
Well, no, we're at
so the
We
one,
have to-
so the,
Yeah, you're looking
Right.
at 55.
55
So there's 225.
plus 75, plus 95,
so,
Was not-
plus
right,
75.
so big picture, right?
150.
Here's the easy way
That's
to
a
look at it.
10-year, no, for 20 years, the 20-year full build out that they're referring to get to 16 million gallons, which would allow us to go to 19 million gallons for just the collection system, is 155 for the phase 1 to go to 9 at the plant.
Right.
95 to go to phase 2, to get 16 million at the plant, plus another 75 for the interceptor improvements that would be needed. Total I come up with is 325 million.
Right, so you're between, so basically,
325.
well, I'm short, 200 to 300 million.
In the next.
But again, that's the treatment plant being phased over the years.
Right.
Yeah,
Right? And the other thing that's of importance is when you look at the sewer demand, 45% of that sewer demand is projected for the village of South Bloomington.
so I'm sorry.
About 45% of this sewer demand that we're looking at designing for is for outside the sewer district, it's for the village of South Bloomington.
Go ahead. Yeah, there's no just later.
Well, what happened was, I'm glad we did, because it really, when we started doing this modeling, this looked very different. Absolutely. This looked very different. And what was driving the costs looked really different. So the reason I started this meeting by talking about these flow projections is because all of these numbers we're talking about are based on this, right? So if these come true, if these are underestimates, we might have a problem. If they're overestimates, just like your current system, if you go back and think about it, your current system was originally designed for 4 MGD. It has served you, you're way over, it has served you extremely well. We are very conservative when we talk about these things. We have to meet design standards. Design standards have a tremendous amount of conservatism built into them because nobody wants sewage running down the streets, right? And that's not an objective. But we based, so the reason, I think you just asked the right question, why is there a 13? It was because we did 5-year development increments. And that's what the 5-year development increment showed us. But from a practical perspective, when Brock was looking at how do I phase building on the plant, you really skip right over 13, you go right to 16. So again, 2 pieces to this, right? There's build a bigger wastewater treatment plant. And there we can phase it. You can build 9 million gallons today. It will not foreclose any future opportunity to make the plant larger in the future. It's planned out for making it larger. So you can do that. With the collection system, on the other hand, whatever decisions you make about how large you want that to be, it's kind of a one and done sort of deal. Now, a couple of other things that we should talk about. Brock,
Before you
yeah.
head on that, just,
Yeah.
Just going back a minute. Phase one was gonna add 3 million gallons a day.
Yep, to 9
And
engineers.
now you're telling me that phase two is gonna add 6 million right away?
7.
7? How's that gonna happen?
So if you go to, so that's a great question, right? So what
Because
we're
I
doing-
thought I saw phase two and then phase three.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So if we want to, so if we go to, so phase one
Phase one.
is designed to expand and not remove the ability for phase two. So if you go to, so if you take your treatment plant, you've got a headworks, which is your screening, you're removing you take your rags out, you take your grid out. You go headworks, we take your screening, your grid out, then you go into your MBR process, right? And, I'm sorry, SBR. And then you go from there, you go to a filtration process, which brings you down and meets those low limits that you have. A UV system, post aeration. We gotta run a new, larger outfall pipe out to the ramp. So when we do phase one, rather than build the headworks for phase one and then have to go back and rebuild the headworks, we're gonna build the headworks such that it is actually built and sized for phase 1+2. So that's gonna be a 16 MGD headworks, not a 9. So that's cooked into that 9 though. This SBR, or the SBRs, we build this is what doesn't get built. Then we've got our filter buildings. For a filter building, we would put 4 of the 6 filters that we need to get to 16 MGD in the building, but the building is built such that we could put 4 filters in today, and we leave room. It'll actually, when you get the design plans, you'll see grayed out areas where those other 2 filters would go. The pipes will be sized for that larger flow such that when you come back and you bolt in those other filters. The UV system, again, we have 3 channels. There's multiple banks of these UV lamps that go down in there. We would have under the 9 MGD option, we have 2 banks to get to the larger flow. The channel's already there. We made the channel long enough to just stick another bank in. So now we just stick another bank of UV in for that. Post air, we build 2 of them. We'd have to build 2 more. This outfall out to the Ramaclone is sized again, even though we're doing 9 MGD, we're sizing it for that larger flow such that we don't have to go back and replace that. So the second project is coming in and tearing out all of this tankage, going down. These are very, very deep tanks, 27 feet deep. So it's a 30-something foot cut by the time we get into there. Is building all of this and all the mechanical pieces that go with this. Buying more filters, buying more UV, construction work, adding a second pre-air, that kind of thing. But it isn't that you're building one and then you're just going back and building a second one. The first one does get more expensive to give yourself the ability to expand the future. That's why
I just want to go back to your phases and gallons. So phase one is gonna add 3 gallons, which is redoing your section 1.
correct.
That's the.
Because we're starting.
So now you're, okay.
Yeah, because we're starting, right now this is 4.
Yeah.
We're gonna go from 4 to 7.
Okay, so.
7 plus 2 equals 9.
Is
Two
in
is
this
over here.
case at 2, right? So right now you got 2, 2, and 2 is 6. We're gonna go to 7 and 2 for 9. So we're taking 2 trains and making.
That's phase 1 and phase 2. I thought
That's
you
just
said originally it was a phase 3.
Well, phase 3 is this way out future phase of, because there was just, the question was, somewhere down the road, what would be the maximum you could ever do on that site? So this one's just more of a, we haven't precluded the ability to do more on the site. Now, in 25 years, whenever this may happen, we don't even know what technology right now, right? So we're just saying you could do something.
The key here is not foreclosing future opportunities to do more. So it's designing the flexibility. It's also making sure that when you do a phase 1, you've all of the cost of phase 2 $1 per gallon is going to be substantially less than the cost of phase 1. Because phase 1 is going to be built in contemplation of phase 2 in today's dollars. Yeah, not adjusted for inflation.
So phase 2 is built will be 16 million gallons.
Yep. So one of the things to think about as we think about all of this, and the reason we still have a 9 and we have all these things is that someone's got to pay for all this, right? So we're back to that idea of you're building things today in contemplation of a future user. And we're not going to get into who's paying for, because it's not our job, right? But what we're trying to do is give you the flexibility, right, to accommodate that. You guys are the legislature, you're the elected representatives here. That's your job to decide what that is. Our job is to try to give you the most flexibility you have. Right now, this is a known situation. Our treatment plant that we have is essentially at capacity. Our collection system is essentially at capacity. So unless somehow there's a future where there isn't additional demand for sewer service, some improvement needs to be made. A long time ago, there was a discussion about adding 3 million gallons a day to this facility. That was, I think, based on probably a lot of different factors. As we do this type of analysis, we see that 3 million gallons is a pretty reasonable, assumption. Now, whether it's really a 0 to 5 year and a 5 to 10, that's hard to say. If we were to put this on a graph and do a growth curve, this growth curve is straight up. When we look at the last 10 years, the growth curve kind of went like this, and then it started to really trend up substantially. It has been going up a lot. So again, these are kind of decisions that are not technical decisions, but again, we're responding to the information that was provided by the communities about this growth curve. So let's see, what else do we want to say? Yeah.
As we're looking at different phases of 42 years, these are projections that are coming from the municipality. Let's say we are moving forward on the 9. Well, we are. If those numbers and projections change as we're working on that first train, is there room for adjustment at that point? Or is it just a matter of delaying the next phase?
Well, that's a good question. So there's a couple of things, right? So,
But we still have to buy into this.
Yeah, that ends up
That's probably.
that ends up being the real key to this, right? And it's the part that we haven't really talked about because we were working on this hydraulic analysis. We've been working on it for quite a while. This system is, as you might imagine, complex. It's been built out over many, many years, lots of different players, different, I think it's been pointed out a couple of different times, different, developers have built portions of the system. There's portions of the original system, those kinds of things. So, but you're right. And all roads lead to, you can build a big treatment plant all you want, but if you can't deliver the water there, you've spent a lot of money and it doesn't bring anybody any value.
Very good.
Yeah.
A question here. When we're looking at all these different scenarios here, it's all within the district, but what about the interceptors and the distribution, as you call it, the collection from Mood? Some of the growth would be coming from that area. So what about those collection sewers?
That's a great question. So communities gave us this information, right? I don't know to what extent when the communities, who are not inside the sewer district, and they provide this information, if they can go on a map and say, this development's over here and it goes into an 8-inch line or a 10-inch line or this pump station or that pump station, but that is they own those sewers and that is their responsibility. What we did was we said, we're going to assume that you're going to do your job out there in the world and take care of your sewers. And that there's a point, and on that first map, you're looking where there's all those arrows that say, this is where this one enters and this is where that one enters. The presumption is that the water is going to get there based on this growth analysis from those different locations. So we had to sort of parse this out. We couldn't say, oh, okay, 6 to 9, just take that 3 million gallons and kind of evenly distribute it across everything. That's not what we did. We said, how much water is coming from each of these input points when we run this hydraulic model? Because as you see on our little picture here, we've got lots of intersections. It's just like a car. We have lots of intersections. We needed to say, where is it okay to have a 4-way stop? Where do we need a traffic light and where do we need a roundabout? Right? So that's exactly what the hydraulic model did, was when they would run the hydraulic model, they would say, like, to figure out when did this line turn yellow? This is the, I'm looking at the 16 MGD one. On all of the prior ones, that line's green. Right? It was okay. Then it moved to yellow. Well, how they figured that out was they said, at what point do I start loading in gallons at the projected growth rate for this geography? And yellow happens. And then they stopped and they said, I've gotten to the point where there's a problem and this needs to be upgraded.
Just another observation, and as we're talking about this brings into the age-old, don't smile at me, like, the governance issue.
You win a prize. Because in our meeting this morning, we were like, this is gonna come up.
This is the governance issue, and this is a very tough situation to figure out how to spread this all out.
It is.
And Michael touched upon it earlier, and Peter just touched upon it, and that's not necessarily your job.
Yeah.
I don't.
What we can do is we can help with, so taking this and this together and kind of interpreting, okay, when, trust me, you don't want to see the spreadsheets behind this. They're unintelligible. We were consumers of this information, staff in our office created it. But we can help with where did the contribution and what was the proportion? Because you're not seeing that part. All you're seeing is the red, yellow, green. We made it simple.
You touched upon it with
Yeah.
first.
So what we can do is we can say, okay, because, I think this was pointed out on this chart before, you have years where it actually looks like some of these go down, and that's because the projection of housing units either stayed flat or went down in certain communities, and then the next year it went up. Right, exactly. So we can help towards that with providing how this information got equated into here, so that you have that as a backdrop, because people gave us this information in good faith, and they saw it on this chart. They didn't see the real life implications of saying, well, I'm gonna have, 2,400 housing units in years 10 to 15.
Not
It
knowing what it's
means
gonna cost.
something, right? So we can't help you with, your hard job, but we can give you the what were the implications of saying 2,400 units in a 5-year period in years 10 to 15 in terms of what it did here, the demand for infrastructure. Because we're now trying to tie those things back together. And, this, as you observed, kind of becomes very, very important. Here, it's just straight up dollars per gallon to some degree. And frankly, Anthony pointed this out earlier, this is an incredibly cost-effective project, assuming we don't have to build reverse osmosis.
Basically, what you have to really consider is what it's gonna cost per gallon. You're gaining 10 MGD by doing the 16 million gallons. So what it's costing is about $33 per gallon per day. All right, what that equates to as a unit, 10 million gallons of capacity is at 400 gallons a day per unit. And that's 25,000 units. All right, that's about $13,000 per unit. That's equivalent to, a single family home building a septic system.
Right.
So it's not like it's, way out of line.
The one footnote to this is that's a raw cost. It's not like a bonded, paid off the debt.
Right.
There's no interest, there's no, right? So that, depending on how you do that, that will affect this math. But nevertheless, what Anthony's saying is it's pretty darn cost-effective project. Because you have so much existing infrastructure that you're relying on.
Yes.
Can't even think about it. I want to ask you, this topic is, when you said at one time, these municipalities should understand their business and be trusted with their data system.
Michael,
Something.
I'm having a hard time hearing. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Stop breathing on me, will you? You especially. Okay, what I'm saying, just looking at this, and it occurs to me, is there any way we verify these data? Because it seems to me there could be some statistical reason. Either we can take the populate, run a whole table on population and say, how close is it to what they're projecting? Is there some way, or, because I would suspect that the way they did it in one municipality may not be the way they did it in another. So
So,
we're relying heavily on those numbers.
yeah,
Somehow, Katie's point, what happens if all these numbers are 25% less than they really are?
Right.
We're not talking maybe about the same
Right.
dollars here.
so as you
We're
may
just assuming
recall,
this is right.
as you may recall, we started this off many, many years ago, applying standard engineering factors to population growth and growth of industry. There is no relationship between standard factors and your system. Zero. No. You have a very unique system here. In part, it's the demographics that are driving this. We struggled to find like analogous systems that were discrete. There might be pockets of demography that match this, but they go into larger systems, and there isn't a good way to say, well, what's the contribution of this geography that represents a demography that's very similar? There is actually, one of our guys in his cubicle has a huge poster that is entitled The Demographics of Sewers. And it actually goes through and breaks down a whole series of different statistical data regarding how do we predict the character of sewer, the amount of flow, the time of day, all of these different things. Your system is extremely unique. So we are challenged to do this. In addition to that, we're a home rule state. We're an Orange County Sewer District. We don't set zoning laws. It's not our job, it's someone else's job. So to the extent that the municipalities control land use, which drives sewer demand, right? Sewer demand does not drive land use, right? It's land use drives sewer demand. So to the extent that the home rule communities are making decisions about, remember what zoning does, intensity, location, and type of development, that will play into this. So to answer your question, I think from our perspective, we ask the communities in good faith, what is your best prediction? This is the information they gave us. I think to Katie's point, we have to loop that back around to, since they get to make decisions about the intensity, nature, and location of development, this is the implication of the prediction you gave us. Now, you as elected officials in the town of or the village of need to take into consideration those land use decisions you are making have a real life impact on the infrastructure that needs to be constructed to support your vision for your community. That's okay, that's all good, but we need to be able to provide, those decisions need to be informed. I think it can be really easy. We deal with, we have a whole planning group in our company that deals with communities, deals with their zoning, deals with their planning boards, does all these things. And we often find that communities have a zoning document, which is, a bunch of sheets of paper, black and white written down, that are very hard for communities to say those black and white words equal. And then when we walk around and we say, see that neighborhood over there? That neighborhood reflects this block. It can be really difficult for communities to understand that. So it is a challenge, to say the least. I think what we can say is that this is pretty aggressive in terms of development, very steep development curve. You have seen a pretty aggressive development curve, and we've been equally as aggressive in squeaking out every gallon you can get here. We've also been equally conservative in evaluating what's the impact of those gallons on this collection system.
I just want to also add, Michael, with regards to these numbers that came out today, this was recalculated because when we first got the first set of numbers, it came up that I think Village of South Blooming Grove, I asked, have you, now with new leadership there, have you done any other kind of new upzones or anything along those lines? And the answer was no, that they are in the process of doing a new comprehensive plan. And that prompted it to go back. Tracy worked together, Mary Beth, and they went back, and then they kind of did try to get their best estimate. And that's when it went from 6
So
Well, from
these,
6.3 million to 10.9.
right, so these values that are reflected for the Village of South Blooming Grove came from, their engineer,
From,
from Mr. Fusco.
Fusco Engineering.
So he's their village engineer and he provided the data. We did give him this sheet and we gave him some of the other examples of the information that we had received so that he understood the type of information we were looking for. So he provided this information with the benefit of knowing that that was the objective.
And I feel that these are more as accurate as they can be, but when we first looked at the first batch, everybody at that meeting was kind of like saying, well, that seems low.
Because again, it was based on those standard population factors that don't really apply particularly well in your communities. Your communities just don't meet those, there's average is average for a reason. There's people above it, there's people below it, right? And you guys don't hit that, that center.
You can build the plant, phase the plant a little more true to what you actually see over the next 5, 10, 15 years by this phased approach. It's the collection system that if you're going to use the interceptors for everybody to discharge into, you need to know what that number is.
Now,
All right, the only option to that, the only option that we didn't discuss yet would be for these outside municipalities to run their force mains directly to the treatment plant. That's also a possibility. We're just starting to review this still. That may be worth considering. I don't know.
That expense would be on them.
Well, yeah, it would be completely on them. So that might limit the amount of work that needs to be done in the collection system in Orange County Sewer District number 1. But there is some outside areas that do flow by gravity into Orange County Sewer District. But the 3 predominant flows that we get from outside are pumped from the Smith Boat Pump Station, as well as the 3A Pump Station from Chester and the Village of South Blooming Grove Pump Station. And the Village of South Blooming Grove is 45% of that capacity. They don't have much further to go from where their discharge point is now to maybe run a completely new force main all the way to the treatment plant. That's one way of avoiding some of the additional costs on the
And
interceptor
avoid that,
and having them incur that cost at 100%. And then you have the ability, as you're building these sequencing batch reactors, as Brock and I have discussed, just because you build it for 7 MGD doesn't mean you have to run it at 7 MGD. You can scale that down considerably. So, by taking it and going 7 MGD plus the 2 that you have there is 9, I'm not so sure that the oxidation ditches, we haven't discussed this, has to be taken offline immediately. And it very well may, because you're cutting off a pipe in that area. So you're going to go probably from 6 to 9, and then you can build the next set of sequencing batch reactors. And as you need it, start utilizing the capacity in that sequencing batch reactor. You'd have a little bit more control over things. It's the unfortunate, situation that we have. And there's a lot of I&I that comes in from those outside communities that, if it were pumped to us, might, we may fare better if that were the case than to try to design interceptors to be able to accommodate that flow. So that's something that we haven't discussed yet, that I'm just bringing it out right now. That might be worth considering.
Part of that, I think, does get back to your question about governance, right? So it's kind of all got to be one big discussion.
Well, yeah, because we have to have a serious dialogue with each of the movement communities outside of the sewer district. To let them know, and we need to have some firm these ranges as to what this is going to cost them. And they may need to take a look at adjusting, they may want to adjust, especially since they're in the planning stages.
Correct.
I mean, you could use Blooming Grove as the example. When this plant was built, when Mood was introduced as an option, Blooming Grove became one of the movement communities. They said, okay, well, we need it here and we need it here, and they were planning for a plant in the back of Lodge Park here. Well, they never got the support from the residents there to support a plant. So they bought in with capital charges and everything else for 400. You see it all the time, and they've only used half of it all this time, but they've always paid on those other lots because that's what they committed to way back when. So lesson learned for the municipalities to be really to understand totally what all of this means.
Exactly. So that's one of the things I think we can do to help is, again, equate what's on this chart back to those improvements.
One last point that I'd like to just get across here so everybody knows as a matter of record, the interceptors that were built in the sewer district were to accommodate the build out of the sewer district at the time that was decided back in the late sixties, early seventies, of 6 MGD. Well, now it's 6 MGD. Those interceptors are at capacity. So they've done their job, but it's the outside communities and the additional growth that we're seeing within the district as well that is causing us to have to increase the size of those interceptors.
So recognizing the time, schedule and steps. So this memo looked familiar, kind of builds on our prior memos. That first page does provide you with some big broad brushstrokes, the numbers that we just talked about. They're not super specific. We will get you more of this sort of fine point information. We thought for today, since it's the first time we're really talking about these numbers, we just needed everyone to understand the order of magnitude, you know, for big picture purposes, ranges between 200 million and 300 million, depending on some decision making. Big picture. So steps and schedule. So we presume that there will be an August meeting of this group. Our goal for that meeting will be, we will be refining the document that we have here, working with staff. We put this out, we called it a working draft because we were aware, like these tables Brock is struggling to read, not in a very good format. They came together very quickly because we decided, frankly, at the last second to add that really big number at the very end. So we will be cleaning this document up. We will be getting that second portion of this document done, which is the regional approaches, this idea, what if we look outside of improving the Harriman Wastewater Treatment Plant? And we will have that information back to this group, certainly for the August meeting, for technical review for that, and then for the August meeting. We'll also, on parallel track, hopefully be working on the sampling, which will let us move along with the variance application. Big picture schedule, we pretty much are where we were in terms of our three big elements, the facility plan, which is this document that we have here, seeker, and variance application. One of the things that we should talk about is for seeker, we have to have alternatives. This document and the seeker document have an enormous array of alternatives, lots of options, lots of different things. At the end of the day, we have to conduct seeker so that we have findings that are based on a project that would be intended to be done. We have to pick an alternative. And we'll need to think about that in two parts. One will be wastewater treatment plant. I think technology-wise, we've come to rest on a sequencing batch reactor. It's a technology been around for a really, really long time. It is operator-friendly technology. You will end up with a facility that has very robust, brand new infrastructure that will give you long, long, long service life. Tanks will have the ability to be changed to new technologies in the future, which may be able to even increase the flows, things that we can only predict. But I think we're kind of there. The question then on that side of the fence would be, is it 9 today, knowing that you can get bigger, go to 16 in the future, right? On that side, in terms of the collection system, it's that difference essentially between, I think we go from a 36-inch pipe to a 60-inch pipe.
Correct.
That's a pretty big change.
Well, 9 MG is 48.
48 to 60. So that's a pretty big change. In cost, it's not linear. Going to 60 it doesn't add up linear. We'll provide you with that information, but we do need to have a final selected alternative. If you guys had this book and these guys do, you'll see that at the bottom, there's a section 9 that says conclusions and recommendations. It's blank. Because we need to come to a consensus. We've come to a technology consensus, but now we need to come to a consensus about what is the selected alternative. Is it, phased approach to the Harriman Wastewater Treatment Plant with a companion product in the collection system that is accommodating what?
And that has to be for the seeker too.
But because so Anthony made this point a long, long, long time
The
ago.
preferred alternative, this isn't the final selection of the
From a seeker perspective, we like to try to avoid having to do multiple seeker processes, right? So we can embed these options as the selected alternative in this seeker process and have it covered by the secret process. That's one of the reasons why we weren't originally tasked to do the hydraulic analysis of the system. As we've been working over time, we've recognized that there's a lot of benefit and value to obviously understanding that side. So that was added to our contract, Joe, a year ago or something like that.
Yeah.
For us to also conduct that evaluation and include it in here. So in an ideal world, we would love to have that selected alternative, right, Joe?
Well, it depends on a lot of issues that I think we all need to discuss in terms of, fully evaluating what's presented, what's going to be presented, and looking at some of the options with regard to how do we handle some of the issues, outside communities, costs.
Right.
So,
Right.
so hopefully,
Yeah.
So when do you think that we need to,
Well, so if we back up and we think about the secret process.
because I feel like we know what direction we're going in. but-
Right, so cutting to the chase, right? So the secret process, if we start at the very back and we work our way from where we are today, the very end is a finding statement. That finding statement is a little booklet that describes the process that we went through, discusses the preferred alternative project, the action that's going to be undertaken, describes its existing conditions, its potential environmental impacts, and the mitigation measures. So that's where like the variance comes into play, because that's a mitigation measure for the water quality, things like we'll have to do a stormwater pollution prevention plan, kind of all the usual stuff that goes along with that, right? That is the very end of the process. Final environmental impact statement is a document that's adopted right before that. That embeds responses to comments that are received from the public during a public hearing process. So we have to select our preferred alternative, get you guys a draft environmental impact statement. That draft environmental impact statement needs to go to the public for comment. The comments that are received, we have to respond to those comments. They become the final environmental impact statement, which sounds like the end. It's not quite. And then from that final environmental impact statement, a finding statement is generated that then is the conclusion of the secret process and allows you to submit an application to the state to increase capacity of the treatment plant, increase capacity of the collection system. That activity can happen after seeker is completed. So given that we have those steps, and in here you'll see we had presented alternatives in July. We had intended to have an EIS in September. Final environmental impact statement in November, which means that in the October-November timeframe is when we're doing that public input process, so that we could have findings in December, or maybe they go to committee in December and they go to legislature in January. Again, we got the message from all of you loud and clear that this needs to happen sooner rather than later. So we're prepared to act. That's a reasonable schedule, provided we have a preferred alternative, really in September.
Thank you.
By in September, you mean for the September legislative session, meaning that you would be in committee in August?
The end of August, ideally, yes.
And as far as the facility plan goes, is that what that would be, that would happen, that you want to have happen in the September meeting?
So the facility plan is sort of all of the technical information that underlies the secret process, right? You have to have all that technical
Right.
information. So that's really what the facility plan is.
Right,
So-
but the facility plan has to demonstrate what the preferred alternative is, and it also has to list other alternatives.
Right.
Or
Which
at least one, right?
Which it lists, I think, 9
Yeah.
alternatives.
So-
It's got lots of alternatives.
Do
We just don't have the preferred alternative.
we have to select one of those 9 to be evaluated against as part of the secret process?
It's all really one thing, right? But yes, the alternative you're selecting is, I think from a technology perspective, we settled on that. It's just the volume and then the collection system side of it.
So with seeker, you don't have to get into a comparison of possible either technology or,
Oh, that's all done.
that's all.
It's in nauseating detail.
So then nothing has to be done relative to that document.
No, that's just an underpinning, a lot of this information, what's gonna end up in the secret documents, that's its purpose.
Okay.
Right,
Results.
it is a little
Right.
complicated.
Right. We just have two other items on here, but before we do move on, Tony, did you have a
I
question?
just want to clarify, are you guys reaching out to Luna? Because when I spoke to you guys about our units, I was told not to include Luna.
So right now, we have flow information from Village of Harriman, Village of Chester, Town of Chester, Village of Woodbury, Village of Cary Shoal, Town of Monroe, Village of Monroe, Town of Blooming Grove, and Village of South Blooming Grove.
Right, but what I'm saying is like, I did not provide you with numbers from our portion of Luna. Did Chester provide you with those numbers? No. So that's what I'm saying. You're gonna have to reach out to Luna and get numbers from them for their projections.
For the town road portion.
For the town of Monroe portion, I can tell you
Okay.
right now, I know we have a lawsuit that we're trying to settle, and that's 78 units.
Okay, so we
Probably
did,
still a little more development within that area too.
because Moodna does not control like zoning and issue building permits, and we did not reach out to them because all of these underlying communities feed into Moodna as just a vehicle that transmits wastewater. So because they don't approve developments, right? That's not their
No.
job in the world. So if you have projects, so we'll double check with everybody, but if you have projects that you excluded because you thought we were getting that data from other people, please send us that data.
Okay.
Yeah, please do. I'm glad you brought it up.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, just two quick things. We're gonna have, Bob, do you have an update on the sewer meters? I think they
It's
were
with
going out to
TGS.
bid.
Yeah, it's gone over to DGS for putting out the bid. It has not gone out to bid yet, but I would presume.
General service.
Yeah, I would presume within the next couple of weeks, it should be put out.
I haven't received it yet, but I've begun, pretty much more than half my review has already been.
Okay, so we should get that out by August or something.
Oh, I don't know, so, yeah.
My goal is to receive it from DGS and bounce it.
Okay. And Bob, just any other word from our new?
They promised us a final report today. We have not received it
Okay, so,
yet. Sorry to say
yeah, well, if it's due any day, once it does, please let me know.
Supposed to get an electronic copy today.
We're gonna get a meeting together with the parties to be at the Village of Monroe and Town and Chester.
Yeah, they advised we get an electronic copy today and an overnight copy we see tomorrow. So I've been checking.
Okay,
I haven't seen it yet.
all right, so we can move on that. All right, if anybody doesn't have any other questions or comments, I think that,
We schedule the
oh,
next
the
meeting.
next meeting, I'm sorry, I have that here right here. I think it's Wednesday, August 17th. At 1:30.
Peter, if I could just add one more thing.
Sure.
Relative to the interceptors, all of that can get built staged also. Because for the 9 MGD plant, you've only got that interceptor down there. When you go to 16, then a couple of the fingers drop in.
Although
that
you
are
want, I
required.
think you'd want to build that lower interceptor, that red for the 9 for like the 20.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
you build it
Well,
for 60, you build it a 60-inch pipe.
Right, we don't have a 20. Is there a 20?
20 is the same as 16, we just didn't.
There's some subtle,
Including pipe size?
there is some subtle variances between 60 and 54. That was coming in, so we don't have a map of that yet, but we just actually finished running.
All right,
numbers last
you're
night.
thinking that
But
way.
that's why I'm using the term 20, but it says 16.
Right.
It's subtle differences we design it.
Mary Beth? With regard to bringing it to physical services, would you be able to have this, what we're gonna go over in the August meeting? a week earlier or so, because physical services is
The following Monday.
the following
The
Monday.
22nd.
Are you gonna be able to make it for your agenda if we do it just the Wednesday before?
I would think so. I mean, we could have the
The other thing is-
resolution drafted ahead of time. And I mean, there's not much,
You're okay with that?
there's not much more we need to.
Because we also need time that I'd like to sit down, especially if we're going to South Moving Road, and say, look, based on your numbers, this is what this is gonna look like.
And we need to get you some information, so when you have that, it'll be nice and clear, unlike, this was a little disorganized, we were running numbers until last night, so we apologize for it's a little bit less organized than we want it to be, but we can get you that information.
Because as you look at this, it's like, okay, well, this is a wish list, but in actuality, how real is this?
We agree.
Because this is gonna cost you money.
Real dollars.
So
You need to make this commitment, so you might wanna,
We agree. We have, that was the,
because
and
I would
Tracy.
not be comfortable approving anything without that discussion.
Oh, you need, yes, I mean, at the end of the day, this is still gonna be an action of the Orange County Legislature, right? So it's, who's gonna pay the bill?
So Katie, would it work better for?
Well, if he's okay with that, then I'm fine with that, because it gives us more time to.
We'll get you that information, like, I mean, the guys can probably do that early next week.
Yeah.
Or I would say early next week,
Okay.
so that you can start your conversations. You don't need to wait for all the rest of this
Okay.
stuff.
We can give something to do.
If you're,
So,
For
I'd
that-
like
for
to buy
that
that time
discussion.
anyway, so if you're comfortable with the agenda.
So we would be approving a resolution to the Florida legislature at fiscal services that would say what?
That would say, essentially what which alternative, right?
The preferred
alternative, which would be, which for instance might say, I'm gonna make up words now. I'm gonna say this right now, I'm making things up, right? It might say, our selected alternative to evaluate for seeker is the expansion of the Harriman wastewater treatment plant and a phased approach, with the technology being a sequencing batch reactor and the initial phase being a 9.0 MGD improvement. And together with that, an interceptor improvement of the lower interceptors to expand the pipe size from 36 and 30 to 60. Right?
And that resolution
Would
Then
then
would-
feed into the seeker
Exactly.
process.
and trigger the finalization of,
What support documentation would be provided for that?
Yeah, so all of this, and we have it to you before this meeting of this group.
there's a
Because
section,
I'm a little concerned that there's a lot there to
Yeah,
understand.
absolutely.
And, you know, we've all been, you know, in the trenches all the way along, other members of fiscal services have not, so I'd like to almost see if we can give them more time to review the support documents that would allow them to
Sure.
go
One of the
ahead
things that we did
and be
the last
knowledgeable.
time that I think was extremely helpful, I think we did two things. And you guys were all here. We did an executive summary that was like a pullout that summarized all the technical information, but kind of for a person who hasn't been engaged in this for 3 years, right? And then in addition to that, we did do a presentation for physical services. It was a PowerPoint. And we did a PowerPoint for the legislature that again was sort of, without getting into these guys get into these very, very, very detailed technical questions, which are great. We need that part. But I think for you guys, it's more about, you know, kind of the big picture, right, stuff. So we can get that information to you very, very quickly for distribution.
And then what are we gonna say about governance? And who's gonna pay for it and how?
That's a discussion we have to have.
that's the discussion we have to have, which is, exactly, which is, if you wish another month, it might be easier for us to evaluate the situation, to look at this, not only with regard to in-district users, but also out-of-district users and the costs associated there.
So that would bring us to approval at the October, I think, versus September 1st.
I remember
Are we
simply prefer
comfortable with
alternative.
that deadline now?
So, essentially what we're trying to do is get to the end of a process that allows you to submit an application, with some additional engineering, but submit an application to the state for approval to expand your treatment plant. That's been the objective of this project all along. So really, if it happens in December or January or
Are
February.
these self-imposed deadlines? So we do have that flexibility.
We did one of these things, you and I sat and said, we have to draw a line in the sand. You can analyze this thing to death.
Right.
We have to say, what is our
Well,
target date?
obviously
times
we
to
have, because we've been talking about it since the 90s.
Exactly.
So do you want to push them back on one?
Well, we're gonna try to get you the information as soon as we can, regardless of, just so that you, and then you guys can
I
say,
think
we
from
need more
your
time.
perspective, you
We're
stay
gonna-
on that track,
Yes.
but as far as you guys
Well,
go.
I guess maybe we go into it realizing that it could get postponed because of the government's issue and how the costs are going to be distributed.
Otherwise, it would be September.
And then.
Otherwise, it would be September.
Well, we try for September and if it gets postponed, it gets postponed.
Once we get one, she presents that room.
And from our perspective, if we know, like that instance I said where we're gonna do SBRs, it's gonna be 9 to start, we're gonna do a 60-inch line on the lower, whatever, then we can keep going. We just keep working while you guys do the rest of your, so that when you are ready, everything else is ready for you.
That makes sense.
Right.
You okay with that?
So we'll meet on the 17th
Fine.
and keep that, and then we'll meet on the fiscal services on the 22nd. And then the governance, we can kind of do parallel with what Delaware's efforts are.
I think when we talk to Joe and Bob about the governance issue. Have a little discussion.
We actually have a meeting tomorrow. Okay,
Oh. Yeah, but I don't know that you're ready with all that, are you?
no, but it's just a start,
Exactly.
okay?
Just one quick question.
Yes, sir.
Anthony, on the right of way aspect of it, I know for a 36-inch pipe, you need about 50 feet of right of way to work, give or take. You start going to a 60-inch pipe, how big a right of way do we need? And how much do we have?
I would defer to the engineer that would do the design work, but I would think that you could do tight shoring so that you don't have to go straight line.
Right now, we've assumed that we can stick within the existing right of way. What we budgeted is rather than build parallel pipe and then abandon it like that, we budgeted bypass pump and dig right through bypass and replace it.
Because that would actually probably end up being less expensive than
'Cause-
dealing with you right away.
Because like you say, right, it's getting quite a bit wider,
Gotta
but
be close
that's
to
a
50
big,
foot right of way being tight to work on 60-inch pipe.
it's a big pipe. And so, and it's gonna be all the utilities going from a 36 to a 60. There's a big area that we're gonna have to work through, which is reflected in that cost
That
estimate.
number.
But yes, it's based on us just digging right through what's
Digging
there.
right through bypass.
Bypass pumping, do manhole to manhole, just keep going.
Because with a pipe of this size, you just can't,
Yeah.
you're gonna do a parallel operation, it's not
It
gonna,
would be, if we can, we will, but without having looked at all those right of ways and all of that, we just super go right through.
we're glad you appreciate how big a 60-inch pipe
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
It's enormous.
yeah.
It's
Manholes get very.
Look a lot of 36-inch, I just 60-inch, double and everything.
really, really big.
Okay,
Let's start to get
we
to-
have
okay.
rules coming up.
Yes, your chairman. of the rules is
And
here.
so,
So we need to do.
With that being said, we'll all stay in touch and see you again in August.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved. Thank you, everybody.